Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Happy Hour Dealmakers podcast. I'm Hershey Ann, business and practice broker with First Choice Business Brokers. And I have a special guest here, Omar Medina, Vice President, SBA Business Development Officer from Commercial Bank of California. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Hershey.
And since you are the SBA experts, I just have like few questions for you so that can be a guidelines for the new business owners. And I'll start with, how do you qualify or prepare for a business acquisition loans using SBA?
Very good. So once the buyer has identified a business to purchase, typically I send them a needs list. And the way that typically looks is, from the buyer, we want to see 3 years of business tax returns, an interim financial statement, and of course the APA or purchase agreement for the business.
Mm-hmm. So when you say interim, what does it mean?
So the interim is typically the time frame in between tax filings. So currently we are here in January 2025, and the things I would need as a bank would be 2021, 2022, and 2023 filed tax returns. And since 2024 just ended, but taxes are not due yet, we would like to see January through December profit and loss statement and balance sheet.
Okay. And then do you have any needs list for the buyer side?
Of course. So for the buyer side, we want to see the same period of personal tax returns, 21, 22, 23, and of course a personal financial statement, and lastly a resume showing all of their qualifications, with an emphasis on either direct or indirect transferable experience for the business they're trying to purchase.
So in your opinion, how does an SBA loan help entrepreneurs build wealth?
All right, good question. So in terms of how it can help them build wealth, it can help them with potentially getting maximum leverage from the bank through the SBA 7A program. And of course, that's the Small Business Administration government guaranteed loan program. So in some cases, people can get up to 100% financing. On average, though, it is 90%. Of course, everything's subjective to the actual transaction, but that's typically the maximum you can get. 90, in some cases, 100% financing.
Okay, so next would be lesson learned from our challenging deals, because we have closed about 10 medical spas and day spas together in 2024, last year. So I want to start with the lease, which I know that most new business owners, they're negotiating the rates with the landlord, but I think that they shouldn't just concentrate on just the rate. They should also be concentrating on the lease terms and conditions. So when I say that, is that new business owners should, match the lease terms on the loan terms, which is, if it's a 10 years for SBA, then the landlord should also issue about 10 years of like lease contract.
Correct. Yeah, and great point, because when you're buying a business, typically real estate is not involved. So we're highly reliant on the landlord. So if you cannot operate as a buyer, borrower, business owner, then obviously that creates risk, not just to the bank, but to the business itself. So the lease terms are very important, and it's good to make sure you're able to get that maximum 10 years. And as you mentioned, the SBA 7A loan program for non-real estate maxes out at 10 years. In some cases, and by the way, with the lease terms, we need 10 years, including options. So an example would be, if it's a 5-year lease with one option to extend for 5 years, that would meet our guideline. In some cases where we are short of 10 years, all that really means is that we would have to shorten the loan amortization accordingly. So if it goes, for example, from a 10 to an 8-year maximum with your landlord, then we can shorten the loan amortization at the bank. However, keep in mind, a shorter amortization creates a higher payment, because you have less years to pay off that loan now. Correct. So we want to make sure it still has cash flow and it still makes sense for the business.
Okay. And then how about on your end? What do you think is the most one of the most challenging lessons that we've had during our deals?
kind of slightly connected to the lease. We also have what's called the landlord release waiver.
Right.
And this document is typically overlooked because it's not part of the fundamentals of just buying a business. Why this is important for the bank is because in the event that we are short from a collateral coverage perspective, and what that means is we have tangible and intangible things that we're purchasing. Intangible would be your goodwill from the business or the business value based on the cash flow it's creating. There's definitely value there, but you can't touch it. So the things that are tangible are things like equipment, in some cases inventory, which is not as common to wrap into our transaction. However, physical things and of course real estate. If we are short collateral, and not at 100% collateral coverage per the SBA guidelines, we are highly reliant on the landlord release waiver because this allows the bank, in a worst case scenario, to go in to the landlord's property and retrieve our collateral. Typically, the collateral could be equipment that's located in the space, and we do need to have this landlord release waiver in place before we can go in. And again, this is only important when we don't have full collateral coverage. If we have full collateral coverage, if real estate has been pledged outside of the transaction, we typically don't need that document, but it is something to consider.
Okay. So since you've mentioned your needs list from sellers and buyers, what are the needs list from broker like me? What do you require?
Very good. So typically, at least in the early stages, what we'd like to see is, of course, either your APA or purchase agreement, and of course, an allocation of value so we understand our tangible versus intangible assets for the bank, and we follow the SBA guidelines. But Hershey, maybe you can speak a little more on what an APA is?
Yeah, so APA is an asset purchase agreement. So that's actually the offer form that I typically submit to the seller together with all the terms and conditions of the buyer. So once that's actually signed by both parties, meaning the seller and the buyer, so that's the time that I open escrow.